manager of the museum's Stewart Auditorium, and I curate public programs. Before we get going with our great conversation this evening, I just want to thank the folks who make our programming possible here at the museum. That's the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Stewart Family Foundation, the Friends of the Longmont Museum, our many museum donors, and of course, our museum members. Any members? Yeah, you know, I barely even have to say it. You just raise your hand. Thank you, members, and everyone who supports what we do. We simply can't do it without community support. I have some competition this evening. I also want to thank the mighty KGNU Community Radio out of Boulder and the Longmont Leader here in Longmont, providing us with everything you ever wanted to know about Longmont online news-wise. We are live streaming to the worldwide intertube this evening, a la Longmont Public Media, and I want to thank them for making that possible. Tonight's program is offered as part of our Thursday Nights at the Museum series. Every Thursday night, we offer a little something for everyone, a film, a performance, a talk, a concert, what have you. I like to call it a virtual cornucopia of cultural delight. Does that sound good? Okay. And then tonight's program is being offered in conjunction with our ongoing agriculture project, Art Inspired by the Land. And without further ado, let me introduce our artists and farmers this evening. We've got Libby Barbee to my right here. Libby was raised on the southeastern plains of Colorado and currently lives in Denver. She received her MFA from the Mount Royal School of Art at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, Maryland. She completed her undergraduate studies at Colorado State University, Fort Collins, receiving a BFA in painting, a BFA in art history, and a BA in French language. That's a lot of degrees there. Yeah. At the root of Libby's art lies a fascination with the emotional, psychological, and cultural implications of place. She is fascinated by the human ability both to manipulate and be manipulated by an environment, and revels in the often confusing and multifarious mix matches of meanings and associations that cling to particular places. From interactive sculptures to images of Western landscapes constructed from fragments of cultural debris, her work explores the dynamics that emerge from the interstices where people and places collide. Much of Libby's work explores the historical relationship between Americans and their environment, and is specifically engaged in examination of the American frontier myth and the mediating role it plays in the relationship between American identity and American landscape. Through various media and forms, Libby's artwork explores the contemporary political and social implications of frontier myth and imagines the Western landscape as both a culture-defining myth and as a thoroughly domesticated and culturally constructed space. Libby, thanks for joining us. Mark Guttridge, on the far end over there, is co-owner of Olin Farms in Longmont. Together with his wife, Kenna, they have been growing produce for the Longmont community for the past 16 years, but it feels like longer than that, right? Yeah. Through their CSA programs, farm stand food access partnerships, and regenerative farming research, Olin Farms keeps Mark and Kenna, their 4 daughters, as well as 20 employees busy planting, weeding, harvesting, and distributing produce, including a turnip this evening, in an effort to provide the healthiest food possible to their community. Besides growing vegetables, Olin Farms focuses on educational classes, field trips, and paid high school internships, all aimed at connecting youth to the land, teaching them to follow the patterns of nature in an effort to create the next generation of healthy eaters and responsible land stewards. Joining us from the World Wide Web is Nicole Banowitz. She's trapped in the internet. Actually, I think she's coming at us live from Kentucky, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
That's right, okay. She's not trapped in the World Wide Web. Nicole is a Denver sculptor who makes sewn inflatable sculptures in delicate assembled forms. Her artwork addresses vulnerability and struggle. She empowers objects through embellishment, building up protective layers, which with time become destructive. Her forms move freely between growth and decay, blurring the distinction between decoration and disease. Nicole's work is inspired by the natural world. She addresses human qualities while using the imagery she finds in the animal, plant, mineral, and bacterial worlds. She has made installations inspired by bacteria, parasitic fungus, viruses, radiolaria, rotifers, horses, and rhinos. All these forms she recreates in soft, inflatable sculptures, which she designs and sews on her sewing machine, sometimes adding illumination from within so that the forms glow at night, and other times adding delicate, sculpted porcelain forms which balance within or on top of the inflatable. Nicole graduated from Colorado State University in 2004 with a BFA in sculpture. She has also lived and worked internationally, creating and showing work in India, Italy, Ireland, Russia, Germany, Sweden, Poland, Taiwan, and England. Nicole is shown in the Biennial of the Americas, the Museum of Outdoor Arts, the Arvada Center, Ironton Gallery, Open Art, Pirate, Contemporary, Gray Contemporary, Saginaw Valley State University Art Gallery, and the Kreuzberg Pavilion, also the Longmont Museum. She is in the permanent collection of the Denver Children's Museum and the Denver Zoo in the US, the Amsterdam Light Festival's Light Art Collection, and Kids Awesome Museum in Taipei. Nicole has completed residencies at the Center for Creative Activities in Utka, Poland, a part of the Baltic Gallery of Contemporary Arts Artists in Residency Program, the NCCA Art Residence in Kronstadt, Russia, and in Berlin, the Glog Hour, I just mangled that, I'm sure. Artists in yeah? Glog.
Oh, just Glog Hour.
Glog Hour, oh, okay, I got it. Artists in Residency Program and the Institute for Alice Moglika Residency Program. She also participated in the Denver Children's Museum Residency Program, making a large inflatable series of sculptures inspired by children's drawings of microscopic creatures. She recently completed large inflatable light installations both for the 2016 and 2017 editions of the Amsterdam Light Festival and showed in the Open Art Biennial in Orebro in 2017. Nicole completed the Archipelago Art Residency in Corpo, Finland, and created new work for the environmental art exhibition Barefoot Path. She was also in residence with Breck Create in Breckenridge in preparation for her work in the Breckenridge International Festival of the Arts. Her most detailed installation to date, The Incubation Effect, was displayed at the Denver Art Museum in 2018-2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our artist and farmer to the Longmont Museum. We were hoping to be joined today by another farmer, Mark from Esoterra, but unfortunately he has a sick kid and can't join us this evening. How many people have seen the exhibition? I imagine all of you. Oh, maybe some of you have not. Since you haven't, you should know that the exhibition is up through the end of the year into early January, and at which time it'll be coming down. So you still have some time to check it out. And of course, if you're a member, there is no admission charge. Just saying. The exhibition features everything from sculpture, fiber arts, cyanotypes, and photo weavings to ceramics, paintings, and digital media. We've also included a hands-on exploration activities for kids and families. I thought I'd just read a statement from our lead curator on the project, Jamie Kopke. If we imagine our world as a tapestry, a beautiful, delicate, and complex weaving where every fiber supports those around it, we can also see it is unraveling. As humans pull apart the strands to serve our own purposes, we are left with the vision that we are separate from the natural world to which we belong and depend. Farmers, with their unique and intertwined relationship to nature, offer us a glimpse of a life more connected. To learn the history of the land and understand what will grow. to bring people together through food and to reciprocate the nourishment. The artists in this exhibition hold up a mirror to us all. Through these collaborations, they have sought to share the many stories the farmers and thus the land have to offer. And as you wander the gallery and hold these strands with you, what vision will you choose to weave? I think we'll get started with you, Libby. You can tell us a little bit about your experience working with your farmer partner. And we have some slides to share with folks as we do that.
Great. Yeah, I worked with the Golden Hoof, which is a farm outside of Boulder. They are mostly an animal operation. So they have poultry, they have pigs, cows. They have both chicken, ducks, I shouldn't say both, chicken, ducks, and turkey. And then they, of course, grow their own pasture. So they grow feed, and they do a small amount of produce. I think what I became very interested in the process of working with the farm was really looking at soil regeneration and thinking about the complexity of what goes on at a farm. In my conversations with Alice, who is the farmer at Golden Hoof, she at one point said, if we really get down to the basics, what we do is we're microbe farmers. Our job really starts at that level of making sure that we have soil that can grow, can grow the food for our animals, so that we can make food from that rich soil. So I became really interested in looking at both the complexity of the systems on the farm, so looking at how the animals contributed to the fertility of the soil, and also the different, they do a lot of compost, so they get a lot of food waste from restaurants and to feed their animals. And so I spent a lot of time walking around the farm, just looking at the ground and thinking and looking at, what was going in and coming out of this this cycle, and wanted to create a piece that really got to that complexity, as well as kind of the beauty of what at one glance might look really, like trash, like dirt. So my piece, as it evolved, the piece really became more and more about the soil itself, and I was thinking a lot about how I get to how I could visually represent kind of this cycle and the processes that are happening throughout the season. So I ended up taking photos of the ground, of the dirt at the farm. So kind of all of the waste, the things that were, the animal excrement, the rotting apples that they had donated that they were feeding to the pigs, as well as the things that were sprouting and coming out of the ground. And ended up creating this long image that explored that throughout the 4 seasons, and then created a sculpture from a grain silo that housed this image. And the image, as hopefully many of you have seen the piece, the image then rotates within this silo, so that from the outside you can see this this image going by, and that kind of transformation as it passes through the window. Yeah.
Kinetic Installation with Grain Silo and Digital Prints
Yes.
is the title.
That's,
No.
that's the media.
Where is the
the title is
it's
just
dirt.
dirt.
It's dirt.
just
Excuse
dirt, yeah.
me. My lord.
But it could be.
Yes, it's called dirt, which
called
is
dirt. It's
appropriate.
just dirt.
Yes, excuse me. And it's, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Somehow I just didn't see dirt there. Anyway. How was it working with Alice on the farm? Did she have much input? Did she provide much? Did you guys talk much?
We talked a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, I went back, actually this morning I spent a little bit of time listening. I visited her on the farm and recorded some of our conversations. And so I went back this morning and listened to a few minutes of one of those recordings. But, she had a whole operation happening. And, I would show up and there would be, I was there as they were lambing, so they had baby lambs coming, so we kind of got conversations in between all of the things that were happening on the farm. And so she was really generous in giving me time to just talk about, what she is thinking about and passionate about in terms of the work that she does on this particular farm, and really the importance of thinking about our human activity as being part of the natural world, and embracing the complexity of farming. And I think that really led into a lot of the things that I was thinking about in the piece. She didn't, I wouldn't say we collaborated in how this was going to be represented, but I think it was important to her to really communicate that complexity, and I think that concern that the perception of farming is that it's, inputs and outputs, and this is a very clear and tidy process. Whereas I think what I tried to get at in the piece and how she's thinking about it is more of this collaboration with nature. And so it's all of these unpredictable things that you can't necessarily manage or, yeah.
She actually says, I have a quote from her. She says, "I'm definitely trying to help people understand that the world and our problems aren't these little disparate pieces, but that they're part of a big complex system. One thing heals when the other thing heals, and we're all connected."
Yeah, she says it much better than I do.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Did you see any parallels between your process as an artist and the process of farming?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that. I have to say I'm also a really avid gardener, and so we have a garden that
objective kind of.
Yeah, and I have often thought of those processes as being intertwined. My work, of course, is very much about our relationship to the natural world, and so I think my gardening is part of that research, that process of making artwork. So I think that there's that personal connection between the two, but I think making art and growing things, I think, are both ways that we can tap into something that's larger than ourselves. And so I think it has a lot of the same emotional qualities, maybe, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to Mark. And see if he sees any of these parallels. Mark, you worked with a ton of artists, with 3 artists over there, namely Margarita Cabrera, who's a cousin of Kenna's, right?
Yep. First of all, thanks to the Longmont Museum for hosting the conversation and for everybody to come out and listen. This was a really special project for me and Kenna, and Kenna's teaching a Spanish class tonight, otherwise she'd be here speaking as well, because she was really at the heart of our involvement with this program. We've done some other art and farm collaborations over the years. We just finished our 16th year growing produce for the Longmont and Boulder County community, and over those times we worked with different local galleries and had different artists at the farm and trialed different things. So when we heard that BMOCA and the Longmont Museum were brainstorming art and farm collaborative, we're like, we want to be a part of it. And it was mainly Kenna who was in all those early Zoom meetings and brainstorming, and convinced her cousin Margarita Cabrera, who's one of my personal favorite artists. She does a lot of community art pieces down in El Paso and teaches at the University of Arizona and has work in San Antonio. And so and community art pieces mean she goes and she kind of teaches a technique to a lot of community members, and they all do the same thing, and they put it together in a big collaboration to kind of have a community art piece out there. And so what that looked like at Olin Farms was we hosted 50, 60, 70, what was the total number of community artists that were part of that?
I don't know what the total number was, but it was quite a few.
Yeah, it was, and we broke it down to first to introduce them to the farm and to the project. We hosted a series of meetings out at the farm, and we gave them a tour of the farm and talked about what Ken and I were up to up there with our growing healthy food and the same kind of love for the soil and the natural systems and the wildlife around us, and how the farm and the creek and the animals and the community and the youth all interact and make the farm a really beautiful place. And then Margarita had people kind of brainstorm their connection to the land and what was their story and their connection to the natural world or local food. And these were some of the notes that people were taking, and in the process of coming up with one of their piece of art to look like. And there was a couple different projects. Some of you may have seen the Big Spoon project that's here in the exhibit at the museum. And in there, all of us designed this kind of square piece that was kind of the handles of these big spoons, and they all had a specific story that was to all of us. You can see people kind of carving this clay on the side. There's Margarita at the top, kind of teaching how we put everything together. And at the same time, we were making these long spoons that were part of another art installation that was at our farm that we hosted during the summer, where these spoons were hanging from the ceiling, and they were over all these bowls of seeds that were donated by Mazda Seed Foundation here in Boulder County. So they're all locally grown seeds. And as someone that got to open the door on that exhibit every day this summer and see the sunshine come in and hit it and take a moment to like breathe in that, I was super grateful that was at the farm. It was a really beautiful part of my whole summer. And just having all the youth education programs we have at the farm, and being able to take kids in there, and being able to host some Sundays on the farm with the museum and get people out there. And
Olin Farms is such if you guys aren't familiar, or if you haven't been there, it's such a community hub. It's so much more than a farm. I mean, you bring people together, you make community happen.
Yep. I mean, it's work hard, play hard. Farming is not an easy way to make a living, so we try to have as much fun as we possibly can while we're doing that, and that's bringing community on the farm, whether it's farm dinners or art or kids' days with tractor rides to see the sheep and chickens. That's kind of what fuels us and keeps us going. So it was really special to work with Margarita and kind of see how everything came together. It was intense, like in the middle of summer, like getting pulled away from the farm to come over to the museum and work on the art piece, but all of our family was involved in it, and and a lot of the community, and really we went out of our way to make sure there was a lot of diversity included for ages and ethnicities, and to really try to capture that story of what the local agriculture and food's all about.
Margarita wrote that her time with the community on the farm reinforced that life is fragile, and that the future of the world depends on the education of our youth and their relationship to the land. The farmers are closely connected to the spirit and needs of the land, and we must learn their ways and their wisdom for our children to have a future. I think she was really channeling you guys there, you and Kenna. And then you also worked with, who do we have next? Patty Rangel. Yeah.
So this was a fun project. Patty's a sculptor from California that was partnered with BMOCA, and she wanted to make an exhibit out of some soil at the farm, and we had some soil that we had in a big pile that was a construction project across the street that they said, do you want a bunch of this soil? I'm like, yeah. And so when she came and toured the year before, like, we have the soil here, you're welcome to use this. And she's like, okay, we'll use that. And if you guys remember, in May, we had a ton of rain, and that soil was a freaking muddy mess. And she's like, we're going to be there in 2 days. And so I was thinking, like, I don't want to give her this muddy mess. Like, this is for an important art thing. Where can I get some good soil from? And so I gave her some of, like, the most sacred soil on our whole farm down by Left-Hand Creek in the back, where we do our farm dinners and summer classes, and where we've been restoring creek ecosystem ever since the 2013 flood, and just have a magical wildlife habitat down there. There's like this bank that was naturally eroded from the earlier floods, not even this last flood, but from thousands of years. When the last flood came in 2013, I realized why that bank was there, because I watched the way the water came and went, and realized that that's why we have this kind of like ledge on the side. And I was like, there's dry soil in there, and there's beautiful soil in there because it's Left-Hand Creek, just gorgeous soil. So when here we are busy planting in a muddy May, and it's like, all right, Patty, I got your soil. So we went in and dug out half the bank. And first, you got to ask permission, like, this is sacred soil from sacred land, and can I take a little corner of this? And in return, we'll like turn this corner into like this awesome pollinator habitat. So 2 weeks later, Kenna's youth classes were out there putting all this perennial pollinator habitat on there. We were mulching with mycelium and wood chips, and have like a nice little new pollinator garden. So always has to be reciprocal is the most important lesson that I've learned in dealing with nature. So it was like, okay, thank you for letting us. So we went in there, I actually just backed the truck up there and gave him some shovels, and like, here's some good dirt right behind here. And sure enough, Patty and her assistant like dug all this dirt out and trucked it over to the BMOCA Museum, and started putting these wood things around it. And then when it was all done, we went to the opening at the museum, and there was this really just stunning, like, that's some of the best soil in Boulder County right there. Left-Hand Creek, all this floodwaters from millennia making this like rich soil, and here it is like at BMOCA, just like poof. Like, it was pretty impressive for me to feel the energy of that piece, and to see how proud I was that Boulder County like put this exhibit on, that we could have some like ridiculous soil in an art museum. Yay!
It's really gorgeous. It's a really gorgeous piece. It was really cool to see you guys to see them excavating that. Mm-hmm. There's this giant kind of pie-shaped piece missing from the landscape over there.
You're gonna have to come check out the pollinator garden next spring.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
And then you worked with Sam Van Aken too.
Yeah, so this was a multiple year. Sam Van Aken is an artist that works with grafting trees. So he has some trees like in New York City where there's apples and pears and peaches, like, because any kind of stone fruit can be kind of grafted on the same tree. And the grafting is you just cut a branch off and you get another branch of a different tree and kind of put them together. Like, imagine your arm fell off and you found somebody else's arm, you just glued it on your arm, and all of a sudden that arm started working. But the other person knew sign language, so your hand is still doing sign language. That's kind of what grafting with trees is like. So you graft a tree on there, whatever that was the original stock is what goes into there. So we did a project which was with the Boulder Apple Project, where they've been identifying all these old heirloom apples around Boulder County. And he got cuttings from like 16 or 20 of those trees, and came out to one crabapple tree and cut all these little branches and attached all those different heirloom apples to that tree, and probably had like 80 or 90% success rate in grafting, which is great for grafting. Sam's an expert. And it was really cool to see like different colors were popping out this year as it bloomed for the first time. And one of my favorite things about it was this fall, after the first few frosts, like the crabapple leaves were turning yellow right away, and those native apples were still like bright green, photosynthesized, and you can see exactly where all the cuts were made, because our local trees still knew how to photosynthesize through a few frosts where the brought-in crabapple was done for the year.
He planted a tree at Olin Farms. He planted one out here in the kind of Greenway Park area by the little pond out there that seems to be somewhat thriving. You guys are probably taking better care of yours, actually. Then they planted one at the Boulder JCC, and then one outside of the Carnegie Library in Boulder, just north of Pearl. I mean, he says, I've always looked at these trees as much as cultural objects as they are objects of nature. Embedded in them are the stories and narratives and histories of how they got to where they are. Very cool. Let's see, let's move on to Nicole now, shall we? Hi, Nicole. You've been kind of observing over Mark's shoulder here. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about your experience working with Esoterra and Mark there.
Yeah, it was really exciting to work with Esoterra and Mark. I kind of went in originally, a lot of my work is about these kind of hidden relationships in nature and a lot about microscopic organisms. So when I first went to meet with Mark, he was showing me like all the microbes he puts into the soil and all the ways he feeds the soil these really important invisible microscopic elements. And I was really excited and I was taking lots of notes about scientific names. But the more I talked to Mark, I realized that he was really what I was interested in his specific relationship to the soil, because he was taking this piece of land and growing these amazing vegetables on it that are so beautiful, but he had such an interesting relationship with it. He was just feeding it all of these things, but also trusting the land. Like he had this idea of like, I put my hands in the land, I'm a part of it, but like, I'm not in control. I just have to sit back and trust that I've fed it all the right things and it's just going to produce these beautiful things. And this kind of letting go of control and trusting nature, I thought was really beautiful. And I was sort of like, well, in the future, if we don't have enough marks, all of our land is getting destroyed, and, people in a lot of bigger farms would be using pesticides, which actually kill all of those microscopic organisms that are really important, that destroy all of the natural, insects that are beneficial. And so I wanted to create this sort of futuristic mechanism that would rejuvenate soil in the same way that Mark does that. And I have this series of artworks called the Biophilic Regeneration series, which this is a part of. And it's this idea of, in this post-apocalyptic world where humans have, forgotten how we should interact with nature and forgotten that we are a part of the world and a part of the ecosystem. How do we remember how to interact with the ecosystem? So this piece is sort of like this machine that you would deploy in this post-apocalyptic world that will reconnect the human to nature and teach us how to redeposit these microorganisms and insects back into the soil. So it's this soil rejuvenating machine that is activated by human interaction.
The Biophilic Regeneration series Terra module. So this is the Terra module. Did you recognize any sort of parallels between Mark's relationship to farming and your own art practice? That's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I think he had so much joy in the visual aspects of things. Like he would just, every time we were walking around, he'd pick up something and just be like, look at how beautiful this is. And like thinking about, when I go to make art, I go out on a hike and I just find things that are beautiful. And like, I just want to recreate this beautiful thing I found in nature. And that kind of joy in like experiencing the land and then wanting to share that with people. And, as an artist, you share it by creating artwork that hopefully speaks to people and brings them back to this excitement about nature or about art. And I think with Mark, it's like this excitement about food. It's like, look at how beautiful these vegetables are. And now we also get to eat them. And every time I was there, he had, oh, try this. Like, it's just so much joy and excitement.
Do you share that kind of sense of mystery, like you don't know what exactly is going to come about as a result of the work? You put all this stuff into it, and then who knows what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, I think as an artist, often you do a ton of work on an art project, and you have no idea exactly what's going to happen when you put it out there and how people are going to receive it. So there's sort of a lot of mystery involved. And even when you start, you don't know necessarily what is going to come out of your project at the end. So I do think there's like a lot of, kind of trust in both areas.
Mark described what you were doing as giving visual form to these realms that are unseen. And he says, I had in a very synchronous way been bowing down at the altar of the microbiome in my farming process. That's great.
Yeah, I think we're both so excited by these kind of microscopic things that have such a big impact on the world, but people don't necessarily see them. And Mark has learned so much about those things, and I as well am always looking for interesting stories about microscopic beings. And in my piece, one of the reasons I chose the gold is because, he talks about this bowing down to the altar of the microbes. Like, these microscopic parts of our environment are so important to our lives in so many different ways. They really are very sacred and important. So all of the gold in my installation is kind of talking about that idea of the sacred microscopic.
Yeah, he says it's really all about inclusivity, all the organisms and how we need all of them. It's going to take generations to rebuild a healthy relationship with those organisms and healthy systems.
Yeah, I think another thing I really love, a lot of times when I'm telling stories about nature, it's kind of showing, something that we might look at and say, oh, this is a pest, this is a bad insect. Like, actually, that lives in a part of a system, and it usually has a place, and if it's in balance, it's okay. And one thing Mark said that I think is great is, like, if you have a really healthy plant and you have a whole system around it, an insect's not going to eat that plant as long as it's in this healthy system. So, you need to respect all the parts of the ecosystem, and you shouldn't just destroy something because you think maybe it's a pest.
Amen. I think I want to kind of open this up to some conversation here. You've all been listening to each other and your experiences. Does anything kind of pop out? Is there anything, have you had any sudden realizations or epiphanies? Or I think, Mark, you have. You also kneel at the altar of the microbiome.
I'm just thinking back to the opening night here at the museum where I saw these two pieces for the first time. And yeah, I was awestruck. I loved them both. When I saw the microbe producing machine, like as a farmer, I don't have a lot of time to read, but I do a lot of audiobooks, and I love sci-fi, and like I was like in a Robert Heinlein book, like 1950s book, like this is exactly what we need. And so I was bowing to the altar of the microbe pushing machines. I know how important that is, and to be able to see that visually in here at the museum was awesome. And likewise with Libby's work, seeing the grain silo and seeing it have more of that, instead of a picture of some corn or something on it, like this cycle of decay, to me is what is most beautiful right now. Is when, like, it used to be, and we were talking a little earlier, like back in, like, agriculture and art were kind of the way we've managed land. Like back in the 1950s, like looking across a huge cornfield and just seeing a sea of green was really, really beautiful, and that was an artistic impression that farmers were making. But we've gotten to a point where, like, now we know, like, that's probably sprayed with glyphosate, doesn't have any of these microbes underneath of it, and it may look green, but it's not feeding us and it's not serving us really in any way. All that corn's going to some feedlot to feed some miserable animal in a feedlot. Like that, how artistic and exciting is that? And so how can we, what I get excited about is farmers that are doing their own compost, farmers that are doing biodiversity is so key, and that's what we see in a lot of these exhibits. And what I loved about Libby's piece is just when you saw the slide of all the biodiversity at Golden Hoof and all the different processes going on at the same time, and seeing that is like the head of the silo moving around. It was like, yes, this is what we need, is bow to the altar of the compost as well.
So many altars to bow in front of. How do you get any farming done? I mean, obviously, there's, as far as I'm concerned, I need art and culture as much as I need food. So there's that kind of commonality. A life without with art is about as good as a life without food, if you ask me. Thank you both for providing those for me. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts come to mind?
Well, I think as Mark was talking, I was just thinking about, and actually Alice and I talked about this a little bit as well, about the aesthetics of farming and food. And, I think as Americans, when we purchase our food at a supermarket and it's all crisp and clean and, we're separated from the reality of dirt and death and those pieces of the process that are really what helps fuel the production of food. And so I think I'm in agreement that we need to have a shift in the aesthetics of food and to be able to better connect the food that we eat with the ground that it comes from, with the complexity of that process, rather than seeing it as something that's manufactured and I don't know. I guess this idea that we can artificially, have these clean inputs and outputs, rather than it being this process that's collaborative with nature.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I've just completely lost my train of thought. This is great. Mark, say something quick.
I think there's something to be said there too. Like we need a transition in the way the art in agriculture is perceived. And the thing I love about Golden Hoof and Esoterra and Olin Farms is it's just the culture. That culture part of agriculture is really there. Like this kind of work takes a lot of hands on the ground. Like Mark he was out there harvesting, I know, for his restaurants today, like with a great team of like 5 or 6 young, dedicated people with their hands in the ground. At our farm, we rely on like a high school internship program during the summer where there's 12 kids a lot of them, it's their first time job, and they're out there harvesting and being part of the land, and all our field trips that come through there bring a lot of energy to the land. And at Golden Hoof too, like just moving the animals, to raise an animal responsibly, they're moving them around all the time, so they're never overgrazing any area, and it's always bouncing back stronger and stronger. And every time I drive by their farm, it just looks better and better. The grasses are beautiful, but it's the way that they have so much hands on the ground, moving those animals around with fences, and it's just the culture part, I think, is what we really need to shift, because really like 95% of our food comes from, at the grocery store, still comes from a lot of agribusinesses where it's just one guy in a tractor in a sprayed field doing a harvest, and we've kind of separated the humans from the land. And because of food regulations, we've separated animals from vegetable farms, and now we have either you're a vegetable farm that buys in fertilizer or compost, or you're an animal farm that's trying to figure out what to do with all your waste. And like, why can't we have farms where everything's on the same farm and it cycles around? That's what we've been really building at Olin Farms. And why I get so excited about compost is I see my chickens eat like all the scraps from the farm stand and the weeds from the field. They have all these nutrients, and their eggs are amazing. You know what's even more amazing? What's coming out the back end, and that's like the start of our compost operation. And that's what goes and makes a windrow and has air blown through it and turns into like the perfect soil that goes back, and that's what feeds all our vegetables. It's a closed system. Like we've been building a way to be able to grow all our fertility on the farm or with the community and not have to buy in compost or fertilizers. And and that's what great art is about too, is like really trying to you see so much around like recycled art, and like some of these pieces, like the recycled silo is a perfect representation, is we don't need to build all these new things all the time, like live model nature. And I think the farmers do that, and I love it when artists are doing the same thing, like taking lessons from nature, because at the end, it's the best teacher.
How do we expose people to that process? I mean, how do we forefront that? How do we expose people to that? How do we reacquaint people to the process of how their food comes to them? I mean, through exhibitions like this one? I mean, yeah, I mean, that's one way, but I mean, how do we do that? I mean,
I think having school gardens is a great way, because I think as a child, you love playing in the dirt, and if you have an opportunity to grow food, it's exciting as an adult, but as a child, it's especially exciting.
That's totally it. It's like our generation that kind of got disconnected, but the next generation of kids, and we have a lot of youth coming through the farm, and they understand like holistic thinking, even though they may not understand what that word means. Like they understand a lot of the bigger picture, and I say it all the time. Let's have so much more fun talking to kids about farming than talking to politicians about farming. This is like their minds are wide open, and they can see how everything's connected, and it's kind of the fault of our education system to kind of silo everything off and become a specialty in this and a specialty in this, and not realize how everything's connected. And that's where Golden Hoof and Market Esoterra and what we do at Olin Farms is like, we are where we are because we realize that the only way we're going to survive is if we understand that everything is connected. And the only way it's going to survive is if everything survives together. And that's the community of people around the farm as well.
I was just thinking back to school, to high school and the junior high and all that. I don't remember. I mean, I remember there were these nutrition classes, which I never took. I never took a nutrition class. But I had no idea how my food got to be where it was, or how it came to me. And I always used to think that somehow milk and eggs, there was some connection between milk and eggs because they were in like the same place, the same general area in the grocery store. But then, as I started to think about it, I was like, there's two very different animals producing those things. But yeah, that's how disconnected I was from it.
I was the same way. Like my background's in engineering, and I landed back at the farm that I grew up on 18 years ago. And I would say my aha moment was taking a bite of a tomato and being like, what the heck is this? I thought I hated tomatoes, and this thing tastes amazing. And that's when the scientists in me want to know what is going on with this tomato. And the more I looked at it, it's more about the healthy soil and the fact that the tomato was picked ripe on the plant instead of picked green and shipped across the country. And that's when Ken and I realized that it wasn't just about feeding our family. Like there was a need in general to get this kind of healthy food as medicine food for our healthcare system too, back into the community. And shortly after that, we realized that we could grow all the healthy food and restore all the ecosystems we want, but if we don't give the next generation the tools they need to carry on that work, that's what's needed. Because unfortunately, like kids need to know how to ride a bike and swim, but unfortunately they also need to know how to grow healthy soil and maintain ecosystems, because that's just the world that they're inheriting. So Ken and I have spent a lot of time in the last few years figuring out how do we get kids on the farm, understanding these systems and what they can do to grow their own food and to build healthy ecosystems and protect pollinators and protect birds and empower them to make their own decisions. Ken tells the kids all the time, there's a lot of adults making really bad decisions for you guys, so it's going to be up to you to change everything.
The title of tonight's program is Fertile Ground, right? And creating that kind of rich, diverse soil within which we can grow, really healthy, nutritional food for people. And then the parallel between, the sort of the cultural parallel to that, right? Which is the how diversity kind of provides, cultural diversity provides kind of depth and richness to life in general. And how you have to kind of tend that kind of soil or the earth or the ground upon which you make your work, upon which artists make their work and upon which people make culture, right? What can you talk a little bit about? Can you and Nicole both talk a little bit about how you guys, what goes into that sort of, I think they call it the manure of experience, from which you develop your work. Can you talk about what goes into that fertile soil from which you grow your work? You know, whether it's what do you take in? Are you reading? Where does it all come from?
No.
Go ahead.
And I
Go ahead,
guess
Nicole.
a lot of my work, like I said, is inspired by relationships in nature. So, like I said, when I'm going out and hiking, I'm always looking for anything that looks interesting that I can then go back and read about, figure out how it exists in the bigger whole. But as you can also see from my work, I'm very interested in science fiction. So I listen to a ton of audio books of science fiction in these futuristic worlds, and how we are going to have to, create these worlds as we lose connections to our environments. So I feel like for me, it's a lot of the visual nature that I see in the world, and then these stories that I'm always listening to, the speculative fiction of what kind of world can we imagine in the future.
Libby?
Yeah, I mean, I think every artist brings with them all of their experience and background, and I think, ended up where I have in my focus in my artwork, largely because I had this experience of growing up in Colorado and growing up in rural Colorado, and being really steeped in the West, the Western landscape, to some degree agriculture, and as an undergraduate, I remember, and my husband can attest to this, repeatedly saying, God, if I ever create landscapes, please. But I went to grad school in Baltimore and just realized what a different perspective and understanding of the West and of agriculture, of our relationship to nature, and that really became the fuel for my artwork. And I continue to be really interested in that, and not only our relationship as Coloradans or as Westerners to the Western landscape, but the entire American identity, and how that is so wrapped up in this experience of and idealism around the fecundity of our natural world. And I think that has so much influenced the way that we think about how we do agriculture, how we develop the land. So I get really, and I think that manure for me is both my experiences as a child, as a young person growing up in rural Colorado, but also very much my experiences in the natural world. I already mentioned gardening, and just that process for me is a lot of fuel for my work. I also, reading and books, and I read a lot of history and, a lot of books and articles about history, and also about how we've developed the West specifically. So that's, yeah.
Thank you. That was, yeah. I'm always interested in what are you putting into the mix? You know what I mean? What are you taking in? Yeah. And I lost my train of thought again. I keep doing this tonight. If you ever do this, eat well before you come up here, because you start to lose your noodle a little bit. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about bringing your bringing your work to market and what the marketplace is like for small farmers. What are the realities of the marketplace for farmers these days? How are you getting by, Mark? In other words,
this is where farmers and artists and restaurant owners can all commune long hours, and it's a struggle of love. Yeah, I mean, farming in Boulder County especially, we've had family farmers going out of business here since the 70s, 80s. That's why we have so much open space, as open space started buying up all these family farms that were failing, and thankfully the taxpayers did that so we could still have open space. A lot of that is leased back to farmers under agricultural leases to keep agriculture going in Boulder County. But yes, we celebrated our 16th anniversary this year. I can tell you 16 friends who were farming that went on to do something else to better support their family. And a lot of those are better farmers than me, and some of the farmers I really looked up to that just moved to other places or started doing other things because it's a difficult way to make a living. So yeah, at Olin Farms, we really I'm never going to send my kids to school just from pulling carrots out of the ground. Like, they're never going to go to college just by the harvest. So we have to diversify as much as possible. Education programs, farm dinners, research grants, and it takes a community of support. I always say, like, the day of the family farm is a thing of the past. Like, these new regenerative farms, if you look at Mark at Esterra's or Golden Hoof or Olin Farms, it's not, they're families at the core of it, but it takes a community of support around those families to make it a farm that works. And so I always say they need to be community farms, and that's where we're lucky here in Boulder County that there is interest, that people want to know where their food's coming from. They want access to clean, healthy food, and then they're willing to volunteer, do a work share trade, and engage in ways that is a win-win for everybody, then keeping good food going into the community. And I think it's kind of similar for artists. Like, a farmer, like when I went to the Bimoka farm dinner at Esoterra earlier this year, and just walking around, like, you saw the pictures of Mark's farm, it's just beautiful. He's like one of the farmers that I look up to the most and follow him on Instagram, and I'm always like, oh my gosh, that looks so amazing. And his farming techniques are actually really, really different than my techniques. Like, we farm in two completely different ways, but when you get back to our manure is the same. Our muse is still like this, being able to work with nature and appreciate beauty every day, and we're working with nature in completely different ways, servicing completely different markets. He mainly just sells to restaurants. Is pretty much all of 100% of his sales is working with restaurants. Ours is CSA and a farm stand and getting community to come to the farm, working with Boulder County Health on food access to have CSA shares going to Sister Carmen's in Lafayette and to local preschools around Lafayette and Longmont and Louisville, and really that kind of community connection. So even our business models are completely different, but what gets us up every day is still that same just excitement to work with nature, and it's a labor of love, but it's a lifestyle choice more than a profession, because it's hard to call it a profession when you got to have a day job in the winter to keep it going.
What's your day job in the winter?
I'm an environmental engineer. Ken is a full-time teacher.
Oh, right. Yeah.
For the first 10 years of the farm, I was full-time engineering, and now I'm to the point where I can just do it in the wintertime. And I still enjoy it. I love that different part of my brain, and I love chemistry and science and doing that stuff too. And it made me a better farmer and knowing all those things, and maybe not going through the traditional land-grant universities, but instead just learning from nature and understanding the basic principles of physics and chemistry and biology and magnetism and beauty and art. And there's more, art influenced my work a lot more than the university, and nature's my favorite artist.
Nature's your favorite artist. I thought Libby was your favorite artist. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, no, it's okay. Well, anyway, Nicole, what do you? I thought Nicole was your favorite artist, actually. Nicole, so are you a full-time artist, or are you also doing some adjunct teaching, or what else do you do? Or are you all art all the time these days?
I consider myself a full-time artist, but I do a lot of education as part of my practice, but more with high school, middle school, and elementary schools. So I go in and collaborate with young people to make art projects, and so that's part of my practice. Also, making projects for big festivals or doing projects. Right now I'm actually completely nomadic and I'm just going from art residency to art residency, so I'm not paying rent, I'm just like living at different art residencies. So I feel like it's a similar thing as an artist. You find a lot of different ways to like put together different things to survive. So it's a kind of mix of all sorts of stuff, but of it is art.
Right, and the goal or the dream at some point, right, is to be a full-time rock star, right, and just be making art all the time, right? That's the.
I don't know.
No?
I feel like I really love the education part of my process, and I love, all the different things that go into being an artist. I guess the dream would be to actually be able to, have a property at some point where I could even have my own garden and also make art.
A compound.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want. I want a compound. Libby, do you want a compound?
I'd like a compound.
Yeah. So you've got a full-time gig in the culture industry.
Yeah, my day job is I work with Colorado Creative Industries, so we're in the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade and support cultural nonprofits and artists, folks working in the creative industries. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities in this respect between farmers and artists. I will even say growing up in southeastern Colorado, most of the farmers and ranchers in that area were teachers, have other full-time jobs. I think they are both systems that probably really prioritize, benefit the big guys, and it's a lot harder for artists working, in Colorado, certainly, than in some of our, in LA or New York.
Baltimore. Just kidding.
Yeah. But it's also, I think there's, probably like many industries, but there's different markets within that industry. So, there's creatives that are working within a lot of different markets, whether that's the gallery system or craft, certainly, the folks who are doing craft shows or, are having
The public art thing.
Public art thing, and I think it's similar with farming. You have your CSAs, your farm market folks, but I think there's something to be said about making sure that we're supporting those systems at different levels. And I think in farming, we saw the fragility of that big farm system during COVID. And I think similarly, we see that in communities that aren't able to support a creative base that can infuse vitality and creativity and community into those spaces. And that's some of the work that I do in my day job. We at Colorado Creative Industries support creative districts, which are really intended to help communities to support those creatives. And I think in both areas we're seeing the need for making sure that we have that diversity in approaches and the size and structure of
A
our
healthy
systems.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
A healthy art ecosystem. Or
Right,
art biome.
A healthy art biome, yes.
Yeah, I don't know what those words mean. I just, yeah. Well, I think we should open it up to some Q&A if anybody has any questions out there in the audience. We are recording and we're also live streaming, so we're going to send a mic out there. What I'd like to do is subtract one of these mics, and you guys can share one, or we can all share. Molly's going to run the microphone around. And I think there was right here and towards the back here. Oh, you turned it off. It's the switch on the side. Did you turn it off at the bottom, Mark?
No, on the top.
Oh. It's just the slider on the side.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
My question is for Nicole, and it's reminiscent of when I was a kid and I was looking at items in a museum. So I was wondering if you have any detailed information about your creations. You know, for example, what is a radiolarian? What is a microscopic organism in the soil? That type of thing. So I was curious whether you put any somewhat detailed labels on your creations.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the project. Sometimes I'm looking at a really specific microbe and, I'll talk exactly about what it is that it does and how it's related to the bigger story. And I think that's kind of what I was saying is when I first started working with Mark, he had these really specific kind of microbes he was talking about, and I was looking like, what do they look like? What should I make? But then I became more interested in almost just the idea of these microbes. So in this specific piece, it's kind of all of those microbes that exist in the soil, which I have in my notes from when I originally talked with Mark, but I didn't list the specific names because it's more about the ideas of them and also, the beneficial insects, the worms, all the things that make healthy soil. But in other projects that I've done before, I would have, like, if I'm taking a very specific thing and making it larger, I would explain what that is. Like, I just did a project about phytoplankton when I was in a bio center in Montana. And so, like in that case, I'm looking specifically at very specific organisms that are microscopic, and I would explain exactly what those are, what their names are, what they do.
Well, don't ask your questions all at once. Please, one at a time, please. Oh, yes, right here. Oh, okay.
Thanks. So this might be a little bit off base, and I should preface it with, I'm no gardener. But I wonder, hearing what you talk about and the importance of organic farming and bringing the earth back to life and all the work you do with the community, is there opportunity to have a distributed model also where the people that have got that education now go back to their own gardens and produce in a kind of an arm of your farm? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. We've been thinking about starting a franchise. It's hard because every yard is different, every farm is different, but there's definitely ways, and we do it at the farm in the spring. On Saturdays we have different community festivals and education things at the farm stand, and other farms come out. And so this year we had some different gardening classes where we talked about how we're cycling carbon around the farm and how we're planting perennials, and we learned by doing it. And so there's how we're making compost teas, and so there's definitely ways to come out to the farm and learn and take that back. We're looking a lot of our education programs. That's kind of the goal when we get our even preschoolers coming out to the farm just to talk about, hey, make sure you're eating 5 colors on your plate every day, and just planting little seeds that they can go home and germinate. And when they come with their parents and family field trips, it's kind of the same way, like helping the parents take tools home as well to focus more around healthy eating, but also how we're conserving water and how we're making sure the pollinators are supported and we're not using any herbicides or pesticides, and how we're purposely planting hedgerows to protect against this more damaging winds as the climate changes. And so all of our techniques are open source. Whether they're appropriate for every yard is hard to tell. So it's hard to franchise the farm model per se. But I think it's there's a lot to be said, and that's kind of one of the goals of the farm, is to get people out of the farm to learn by doing. And I think this was what really excites me about where art and agriculture and music and chefs can really align. Like, I think we could actually build a really savvy, like, agritourism business here in Boulder County, where people will fly in from New York and California and are staying in these Airbnbs on farms, which are right now totally illegal with land use, so they don't exist. And they're having all these awesome farm dinners on farms, which are now totally illegal because there's not certified kitchens on farms because of Boulder County health and land use. But if we took all those hurdles out of the way, imagine these families are here, they're gardening, their kids are in these education programs with the animals, and they're learning about soil restoration. Their chefs coming out at night and cooking with all this amazing local produce that was harvested that day. And then at the end, they're going back to wherever they came from with those lessons and taking that back home with them. And maybe we can get a grant funding and get I got the musicians, I got the chefs. We just need to get the land use code out of the way, and we can make it happen beautifully. And imagine the economic support that could bring to Boulder County to have a tourism industry here, just like what happens in the mountains in the wintertime. There's no reason that shouldn't be going on in Boulder County when you have places as beautiful as Golden Hoof and Esoterra and Olin Farms. Like, we see it, the need for people to get back on the land, the need after COVID to have kids connect with each other in the natural world is huge. Like, just the need for our mental health to get back on the land is huge right now. So there's a big need in the community, in the world. Like, we should get all the artists, farmers, chefs, and other fun people together and make it happen.
And we can do it here. They can all come together here. I think there was another question over here. Molly's getting some exercise in this evening.
Hello. So I actually grew up on a cow-calf operation, so very familiar with the whole farming thing. So I kind of grew up like connecting art and farming because sorry, this is way too much personal information, but I'm from Midland, Michigan. So Alden B. Dow, big art guy, he, architect, but art guys, all in the same. He was in my hometown, so obviously so was my cow-calf operation, so I've always kind of thought as farming and art is the same thing. You're producing something, you're making something, and you're getting it out to consumers for people to enjoy and take in. So I was wondering how you guys would take that connection, and if you think there would be a future or like an opportunity to go into inner city places where art is more promoted and make that connection between the art and the farming, to get people back to their roots, to make them understand, milk and eggs are not connected. So if you could do that, within an art project and within places like Chicago that really focus on performing arts and different art styles like that, but not necessarily on like farming, as there's not much farmland in Chicago, but just like the connection between those. How do you guys think that, that would work in the future?
Well, I think when I go in and work with classrooms, I'm talking a lot about nature and maybe not specifically farming, and that might be something I'll think about in the future, but I do a ton of projects where I teach kids about pollinators, and we make pollinator partners, so they are, creating different, like we talk about the different pollinators, we talk about the plants that are important, and then they create little sculptures of those, and we talk about all those interconnections. And so I think there's tons of ways you can use art as a way to teach kids about nature and relationships in nature. And I think for sure I could think about some more projects that really bring in food and farming for sure, for the future.
Yeah, I think I think even here in Denver, I've seen quite a few artist-led, community engaged art projects that are centered around gardening for various population, whether that's students or folks living in elderly housing. I think there's a lot of potential for gardening, actually. I think Americans have really moved so far away from any production of their food, and I know I personally, my gardening habit is in part fueled by the desire to not put my food waste into a landfill where it's going to turn into methane. And so, I think if people have some basic ability to grow things and to compost their own, their own food waste, I think at least that expansion of an understanding of what farming is and where their food comes from, and an appreciation for the work and effort that goes into producing it. I don't know.
I think there's definitely a lot of potential, and it's easy to at BMOCA, one of the exhibits there was actually like a living grass that Andre from Jacob Springs Creek, he had these heirloom seeds that were actually like an Iraqi heirloom grain seed that somebody had brought over, and he was saving them, so they sprouted all these seeds, and they made this awesome little display that was kind of like an elevated little green grass field, but when you kind of understood the story about it and saw it growing, it was cool to see. And then there's even production ways, like I'm a soil farmer. Like most economic farmers are going into greenhouses now because the climate's getting crazy and you can control everything inside the greenhouse. But I love being outside and in the fields, so we grow all our stuff in the fields. But in the inner cities especially, it's a perfect place to have microgreen operations, mushroom grow operations. In the wintertime when it gets cold, I like to grow mushrooms in our barn, just getting like spent oyster mushroom bags from a mushroom farmer and putting them on new media and watching those mushrooms spread and eventually fruit into new mushrooms is like a really powerful project that I can geek out on all winter long. But every tour I give to the farm, like everyone's excited about the mycelium. So to try to have like some mushroom grow, whether it's part of an art or just part of an education program where kids can go see it, like there's definitely ways to do vertical hydroponic farming in the city just to build that connection. But we need to also get those kids on buses and get them to some real dirt and to run around some real trees and creek every once in a while too.
I know in a lot of urban areas, there's a lot of urban farming where they'll take over like a vacant lot and turn it into some kind of community farm kind of deal. Oakland's done a lot with that, I think, and then in LA there's a lot of community farms where kids are invited to. My little sister even used to run a little community farm in South Pasadena outside LA. Anyway, there is a good bit of that. I think we have time for maybe one more question if there are any. Oh, look at that. We do have one more.
Thank you. First of all, I think it was you, Mark, who had said it, but you mentioned food is medicine. I just wanted to say that really resonated with me growing up on the Navajo reservation down in Arizona. We have this real spiritual connection with our food, the animals, and the plants. So I just wanted to say thank you for, I guess, your view on all that. And just kind of curious to any of the artists, have you had the opportunity to work with any of the indigenous tribes or any local knowledge when it comes to, I guess, farming practices or even maybe inspiration for some of your art pieces?
I will say that I have not directly, through an art project, worked with any of the indigenous cultures here locally. I was part of a group. It was a climate and arts conference. Actually, it was right as COVID was hitting in Arizona, and we had some really interesting guest speakers who were speaking about their indigenous, planting practices. And I think you bring up a good connection there between art and culture and the practice of farming, because I think when I think in Western culture have really separated both art and farming from our shared culture in so many ways, but those are in so many cultures really connected, both the art and the farming practice. So, yeah.
Well said. So well said.
Yeah. And I also have not had an opportunity to work with any Indigenous communities, but I listen to quite a few audiobooks that are Indigenous authors, and I find a lot of inspiration from the way they speak about nature and the connection to the land, and I would love to have an opportunity in the future. This is actually the first time I've ever collaborated with a farmer of any sort, so it's kind of a new area that I'm working in.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, like, the practices that Mark and Golden Hoof and Esoterra and Adolin Farms, like, all these are rooted in working with nature, and that's nothing new. Like, all of our practices are rooted in indigenous wisdom, and part of it's because we read the land just like ancient people read the land, and we have the same teachers. Like, it wasn't something that was verbally taught; it was something that was felt from the land and put us in a place. And I appreciate your question, because I think it kind of in summary too. Like, how do we tie culture and agriculture and art all together? And it used to be like our harvest festivals when we got together and danced and drummed, when we're all tied to like agricultural events, the big harvest, the planting. These are all very ceremonial, ritualistic times, and celebrating as a community those changes of season is kind of, we've lost that. We have a lot of holidays now, but they're not necessarily about like the change in the seasons, and this is when we do this, and it's and I think we have a great opportunity to bring that wisdom back, but also most importantly that celebration back. And to end it on a mushroom note, Paul Stamets is a great mushroom farmer up in Washington, and he had a recent video where he's talking about, like, I had this epiphany that here's all these interconnected mycelium underneath the ground, like all the trees, all the forests, everything's connected with mycelium, kind of the World Wide Web of nature, right? And what we've learned is, like, they have electrical signals that they move to each other, and the whole forest communicates. He's like, just imagine these old rituals where everybody was there in these drum circles drumming, and you think it's just those people there experiencing that drumming, but that mycelium network is taking it for miles and miles, and the whole forest is feeling that drumming. And that's where we could get back to, if we could get back to just working with nature and celebrating with nature. Like, we got to get art and farming and celebration and medicine all intertwined again if we're going to save this planet.
Yes, and I think that is such a fantastic place to end. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for being involved in the project. You know, this agriculture project was years in the making, and COVID kind of derailed it, and then and it took a lot of doing to get this going. And I want to thank our partners at BMOCA, all the artists and all the farmers for being involved. And the exhibition's still up through the end of the year, so if you want to enjoy it some more, if you haven't checked it out, please do. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Nicole, for joining us tonight.